The sun was sinking low, its last embers spilling into the room through the small square window. The light wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened, like honey poured over wood, coating the walls and the few old photographs that hung crookedly. Dust motes floated lazily in the glow, turning the air itself into something almost golden. The grandmother sat in her chair, the same wooden one she had used for decades. The curve of her body had shaped it, and the creak it gave each time she shifted seemed to carry memory. Her hands, wrinkled and veined, rested on her lap. They trembled slightly when still, but when they moved, knitting, folding fabric, or holding the small hand beside them, they became steady, as if age had not robbed them of their purpose. Her eyes, soft and clouded by years, still held light. Not the sharp fire of youth, but a dim, steady flame, the kind that keeps burning no matter how strong the wind blows. When she blinked, her lashes brushed against cheeks lined with stories untold. The child sat close, knees drawn up, small face tilted upward. Wide eyes reflected the fading light like mirrors. They studied her as though each wrinkle were a secret map, as though each line could guide them somewhere important. "Grandma?" the child whispered, fingers curling around her hand. The skin was warm but fragile, like paper kept too long in sunlight. "Tell me a story about when you were little." The grandmother let out a long breath. Not a sigh of annoyance, but of memory. Her voice, when it came, was deepened by age, carrying both the roughness of pain and the softness of love. "A story?" she murmured, her gaze drifting toward the window where the light was slipping lower and shadows began to gather. "Ah, my child. My stories are not like the ones in your books. They are heavy. They are full of storms and loss, but they are also full of love." The Hild leaned closer, eager, resting their chin against her arm. "Please, Grandma, I want to know." Silence lingered for a moment. Only the creak of the wooden beams above and the distant call of evening birds filled the room. Then the grandmother nodded slowly. "Very well, she said, her voice softer now, carrying a rhythm that pulled time backward. "I will tell you, and you must listen carefully, because each word carries the weight of a life." She closed her eyes. The room seemed to change. The golden evening faded into a darker, older light, as if her words themselves could open a doorway. And just like that, her story began. The grandmother's voice drifted into the dimming air, low and steady, carrying the child back through the years. "I was not much older than you," she began, her eyes unfocusing, as if the wooden walls around her were dissolving into another place, another time. "My world was small, smaller than this room. But to me, it felt endless." The vision of her childhood came alive. A narrow dirt road stretched through the heart of the village. Houses made of wood and clay leaned against one another, like tired companions. Smoke curled from their chimneys in thin threads, carrying the scent of burning firewood and boiling rice. Chickens scratched in the dust. A stray dog barked lazily at the evening air. Children's laughter spilled out of doorways, bright and sharp, echoing against the low hills that cradled the village. The grandmother, then just a little girl, was among them. Barefoot, hair tied in loose braids, her dress patched so many times it carried a rainbow of stitches. She remembered running through the fields, chasing dragonflies until the sky turned violet. She remembered her mother's Tianan, a voice that could be stern yet sweet, pulling her back home before night fell. And she remembered the warmth of her siblings, their laughter tangled with hers, filling the small house like music. But even then, shadows lingered. The village was beautiful in its simplicity, but it was also fragile. Droughts came often, leaving the fields cracked and begging for rain. Food was never abundant. Each grain of rice was measured, each meal a reminder of survival. Yet in her memory, it was not the hunger she recalled most vividly. It was the sense of togetherness. Nights when her family gathered around a dim lamp, her father's voice telling stories of heroes and spirits. Her mother's hands always busy, weaving mats or mending clothes, while her eyes softened whenever they landed on her children. "My childhood," the grandmother said, her voice tinged with longing, "was built from little things. Laughter in the dust, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of my mother humming as she cooked. We had so little, and yet, somehow, it felt like enough." The child's eyes glistened in the fading light. "It sounds beautiful, Grandma." The grandmother smiled faintly, though sadness pulled at the corners of her lips. "It was beautiful, my dear. Beautiful and fleeting. Like the evening sun. Warm, golden, but always slipping away." She fell silent for a moment, her gaze lost in the distance. Then her voice lowered, heavy as the twilight settling outside. For the storms were already gathering, and soon the village of dust and dreams would change forever. The grandmother's hand trembled slightly in the child's grasp as she continued. Her voice grew quieter, as though the words themselves were heavy to lift. "In every life," she whispered, "there comes a moment when childhood ends. Not with age, but with loss. For me, it came too soon." The scene unfolded in her memory. The sky that day was a dull, pale grey, as if the sun had forgotten to shine. The fields outside the village lay thirsty, their soil cracked into jagged lines. The air smelled faintly of sickness, a sour, metallic scent that clung to the walls of their little home. Inside, her father lay on a thin mat, his breath uneven, his face drawn and pale. He had been strong once, broad-shouldered, with bends that could split wood and carry sacks of grain. Now, those same hands trembled when they tried to lift even a cup of water. She remembered crouching beside him, clutching his fingers. They felt rough but strangely light, as though strength had already slipped away. Her mother's eyes were red and swollen, yet she tried to smile through her tears. "It's only a fever," she told the children. "Your father will be well again." But even at that young age, the girl knew. She saw it in the way her mother's hands refused to let go of him, in the silence that filled the house whenever his coughing stopped. That night, the air was still. The girl woke to the sound of her mother's cry, a sound that would echo in her heart forever. She rushed to her father's side, but his chest no longer rose. His eyes, once bright as the river in sunlight, were closed. His lips, which had told her so many stories, would never move again. The world shattered in an instant. The grandmother paused here, closing her eyes. Her breath wavered, and for a long moment The child feared she might not continue. But then her voice returned, steady yet laden with grief. That night, she said, I learned what it meant to lose someone. The house felt larger, emptier. My mother's hair seemed to turn grey overnight. And though I was only a child, I understood that I had to become more than that. There was no choice but to grow. The child pressed closer, resting their small head against her arm. I'm sorry, Grandma. The old woman's lips trembled into a faint smile. Ah, my dear. Sorrow is the thread that weaves us into who we are. I did not know it then, but that loss, that breaking, was what made me strong enough to carry the years that followed. Outside the window, night had almost fallen. Shadows lengthened across the floorboards. The grandmother's eyes, heavy with memory, shone with a light that was not from the fading sun, but from the fire of survival. It was only the beginning, she whispered. The grandmother's eyes lowered to her lap as she spoke, her thumb absently tracing the lines of her own palm, as if those wrinkles were carved reminders of long-ago burdens. After my father's passing, she said softly, the world did not stop to mourn with us. The sun still rose. The fields still needed tending. Hunger still came knocking at our door. The village, once filled with the girls' laughter, seemed quieter. Each day began before dawn. With her mother rising in the dark to fetch water from the well, the girl stumbling behind with a smaller clay pot that felt far too heavy for her thin arms. The path was rough, stones biting at her bare feet, but she did not complain. She had seen the hollow look in her mother's eyes, and she knew. Every step mattered. At home, chores multiplied. She learned how to sweep, how to grind grains, how to mend the small tears in clothing with clumsy stitches. Her hands, once meant for play, became hands of work. And still, it was never enough. Her younger siblings cried at night, bellies aching from emptiness. She remembered spooning what little rice they had into their bowls, keeping none for herself. Her mother scolded her for it, but the girl only smiled, hiding her hunger as best she could. There is a kind of strength, the grandmother said, her voice wavering but resolute, that comes not from wanting to be strong, but from having no choice at all. I was only a child, but I became another pair of hands for my mother, another pillar for my family. Each sacrifice, each small act of giving, stitched a kind of armor around my heart. And yet, there were still moments of tenderness. On nights when her mother hummed old lullabies while mending clothes, the girl would rest her head on her lap, the rhythm of the needle and thread like a heartbeat in the silence. On mornings after rain, she would run outside before chores begged, Anne, letting her feet splash in puddles, stealing a brief fragment of childhood before the weight of duty returned. The child listening to the story tightened their grip on the grandmother's hand. You were just a little girl, they whispered, their voice tinged with disbelief. It wasn't fair. The grandmother smiled faintly, her tired eyes softening. Life is not fair, my love. But fairness is not what keeps us alive. Love does, duty does, and the will to keep walking even when the road feels endless. She turned her gaze back to the window, where the first star had appeared in the darkening sky. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. It was in those years that I stopped being a child. and became something else, something in between. Not yet a woman, but no longer innocent. The child leaned against her, their heart aching with the sorrow they had never known. The grandmother's silence stretched, heavy and tender, until she spoke again. But life has its seasons, and even in hardship there are moments of warmth. For in those days, I also discovered something that made my heart flutter, even amid the dust and hunger. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and that, my child, was the beginning of love.